So just a bit of context about my talk. So as John mentioned, I'm the design director for IBM Watson Health. And I don't know how much people know about what's going on inside Watson Health. But just to give you an idea, basically, Bruce was talking about pulling it all together, personalized, to be able to deliver personalized care. We work on problems that have to do with delivering actionable insights to people that help people make better decisions about their health care, about their health, about their well-being. That's it in a nutshell. So when I was preparing, when I was talking to people at Mayo Transform about what I could talk about, one of the program directors asked me a question. He said, "So what's it like?" I said, "Well, I joined Watson Health in December of last year. You could tell by my gray mustache or my gray beard that I've been around a while, but I've only been at Watson Health since December of 2015. It's actually a relatively new division of IBM. It was actually formally formed in April of 2015. Now, there's a longer history of IBM working on health problems in Watson, obviously, but you could think about it as a relatively new organization. So when the program director for the conference asked me what's going on and what it's like, I said, well, this is the way I describe it to some of my friends. I say, imagine that you've joined 5 companies and 20 startups at the same time. That's what it's like. So we are working across a wide spectrum of problems. We're trying to help people who are concerned with the population the health of populations. We're working to provide insights to health economics outcome researchers. We're working with people who are struggling with cancer. We're trying to figure out solutions to help oncologists make better decisions about the treatments that they recommend for their patients. So it's a full spectrum. There's a lot going on. So the next question that the program director asked me was, what's the most strategic thing and the most important thing that your team is doing? So I lead a team of designers distributed around the world. It's a significant team, but we're still a small but mighty force within a much larger organization. So how do we maximize our impact? So that's what I want to talk about today, is what I think is the most important thing that we're doing, because the answer came to me in a nanosecond. And this is something that I've been focused on for many years, and I think what I'm going to talk about today, I'll talk about how we're trying to do it at Watson Health, but really what we're doing, I think, applies to everything that we're trying to change and address, to all forms of innovation. Whether you're designing a new hospital, a new physical environment, you're designing a new way to engage with people in primary care, you're designing a new technology solution. In some ways, at its core, it's the same process. So most of my examples will be Watson Health examples, but I think the principles that I want to convey, I think, are applicable everywhere. So let's see if I can get this going here. Oh. So I know that this conference, most people here who are familiar with design thinking, human-centered design. That's a lot of the reason why people are here. So I'm not going to do a primer on human-centered design, but I want to describe this loop that was a little bit annoying as it spun around. But to me, there are lots of different ways to represent the essence of human-centered design. This is IBM design thinking's way of representing it. I think it's simple and it conveys some really essential principles. So let me talk about this really quickly and then get into the things that I want to comment about essentially the main point of the talk. So human-centered design, this to me is the process. We go through a process of observing people. We observe many things, but we observe people to learn about their experiences, because we want to figure out what really matters to people, what are really the most important problems, and what are the opportunities to actually transform their experience and to deliver better outcomes and help people achieve their goals. That's pretty straightforward in some ways, but we'll talk about some of the details about how to do it. Reflect. So reflecting is not just about distilling what you've learned, actionable insights about the people, but also with a particular lens, how you can make a difference. And it's generating hypotheses about what will make a difference, generating hypotheses about what factors are really important to people, how to really personalize a service or a treatment, for example. And then making is critical to the process, and I'm going to come back to why that's critical. But then based on what we observe and based on what we reflect on and the hypotheses we come to, we make things. So people yesterday mentioned, a couple of speakers mentioned things like rapid prototyping, et cetera. Making doesn't necessarily mean building a prototype. Making means creating something that enables you to engage with people, to get feedback, and to learn more. Okay, that's really what it is. It could be a story, it could be a sketch, it could be a storyboard, it could be an interactive prototype, it could be a simulated environment. What you make depends on where you are in the life cycle and what problems you're trying to solve and what problems you're trying to understand. So that's the critical process. So the thing that makes this run, what really powers this, is engagement with people. So Gwen talked about engagement with people as psychophysiological arousal. I'm going to talk about engagement in a slightly different way. But the idea is that this whole thing doesn't work unless we are engaging with people. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the principles. People power the loop. I call this the loop. And you'll see me doing this a lot. It's a little annoying habit I've picked up since I joined IBM, but actually I was doing this before I joined IBM because that was the natural way I thought about it. So the idea is you go through the loop, you make something, you have people engage with it, you now understand more, you can make something a little bit better, and you iterate through it. Now, why is that iteration so important? So I'm going to talk about several things. I want to talk about why this is critical. I'm going to talk about when you do it, who you do it with, how you do it, and the so what. Why does this make a difference? And hopefully there's some things you can take away and apply to take those baby steps that Bruce was talking about. Because a lot of this is actually, you can do this in baby steps. Why do we do it? How many people have ever heard the term wicked problems? And I don't mean wicked like in Wicked Hat, if you're from Boston. I hope I didn't insult anybody. I mean wicked in the sense of it's a certain class of problem. And this was described in the 70s. But there are problems that are well-defined, where you know what the goal is, you know what information you need, you know what path you need to take to get there. Those are easy. Those are algorithms. You just need to gather the information, plug it in, you get there. On the other end of the spectrum of problems are ill-defined problems, where the goal is murky, or it's subjective, or it's complex. You may not even know what information and resources you need to solve the problem, and there's no predefined path. How do you solve that? And there's a special class of those problems that are the hardest of those ill-defined problems, and those are the wicked problems. And they have some special characteristics. The one that I want to highlight is that wicked problems, the only way you can understand a wicked problem is by trying to solve it. Okay, so think about that for a second. That means that when you try to solve that problem, it'll actually reveal new layers to the problem. It'll help you. There's information you didn't know that you needed to know. It may change your understanding of the problem, but you can't solve the problem by sitting in a room somewhere and just thinking about it. You have to make something and then have people engage with what you make and learn. So we work on wicked problems. We all do in this room. Trying to figure out how do we create a solution, as an example. How do we create a solution that helps an oncologist, a medical oncologist, figure out with the person that he or she is working with, who has cancer, who's been through 2 rounds of first line and second line treatment and best practices, and nothing is working. The cancer's recurred. What do we do now? How do we create a solution that helps people figure out what to do now? There is no algorithm for that. There is no predefined path. How do we promote health and well-being? Well, health and well-being is actually complex and multifaceted. Different people, Bruce was talking about personalized approaches. What health and well-being means to me may not be what it means to you. So these are wicked complex problems. So this is critical, this iterative loop of engaging with people, observing, reflecting, and making, and then repeat, rinse and repeat is just critical, or else we'll never get there. Oh, let me go back. So this is really my only slide. I want to kill people with slides. So when do we do this? My answer is all the time. So let me make this concrete. So if any of you work in a technology company, or and even if you're not working in a technology company, it's very popular now to talk about working agile, working lean, and sprinting, working in sprints. Okay, so the idea is that you're going to go through, agile development or lean innovation or this human-centered cycle and do it in sprints. But how long are the sprints and how often do you do it? The challenge that I posed to my team because I believe this is, again, I'm trying to tell you what I think is the most transformative thing that we do and that can be done, is I tell my teams is, I don't want us to be designing and making things for a month and then go test it. That's crazy. There's so many opportunities to learn along the way. So what I challenge our teams to do is I want people to be engaging with the people who are the targets for the solutions we're creating every week. So we sprint every week. Even if development teams and the broader teams are not making big things every week, even though we're pushing them to actually do that with us, we are doing design and learning sprints every week, that engagement with people. Now, the good news is let's talk about who we do it with. And there's some good news here. If you're going to do this every week, it doesn't take a lot of people. We're not talking about interviewing and observing 20 people a week if you're working on a particular solution. The good news is that you can work with small numbers of people and learn a huge amount. So all I tell our teams is that just make sure that you talk to 3 or 4 people or observe 3 or 4 people a week. And that should just be a regular part of the process and get that continual learning process going. Who are the people? And I'll talk about how this adds up after a while. Let me take a little bit of a side trip. So sometimes people are worried about dealing with small samples of people. And I think that's a valid concern. What we learn with 2 or 3 people, is that going to be applicable to broader groups of people? Very valid. I would point out that some of the most significant things that we discover are based on working with 1, 2, or 3 individuals. How many people have heard of Piaget? Piaget transformed the way we think about cognitive development and child development. Do you know how large his sample size was? It was 3. It was his kids. He observed his own children, and he came to some insights about how his children were learning about the world. Now, he wasn't right about everything, but he had some fundamentals pretty on target, discovered some pretty fundamental things. And we know when we do assessment work and we test technology as an example, we know that if we choose people well and we engage with them effectively, that even if we engage with a small handful of people, we can identify like 80% of the barriers that people will experience in a solution. But what we're talking about is real engagement, qualitatively, especially early on in the life cycle, with one-on-one with people or in groups of people, depending upon what we're working on. So for example, if we're trying to create a solution for a tumor board to enable them to do collaborative discovery and decision making, well, we're going to study that as a group of people. But we're studying individuals and small groups who are interacting with each other. That's our focal point. But imagine that you're doing that you've done that for 8 weeks. And every week you're engaging with 3 to 4 people. At the end of 8 weeks, you now have 24 people. At the end of 16 weeks, you now have close to 50 people. So, and I'll talk about how we try to leverage that. So the idea is, in small increments, keep engaging. And there are challenges to do, and we'll talk about. Make sure, in terms of who, that the people that you engage with are really the people you're trying to serve. So companies sometimes make mistakes because they go for what people in research call convenience samples. These are friends and family. Another mistake, which are valid, they are human beings, but they may not be the target audience that we're actually trying to serve. Or another mistake that we commonly make is we rely on proxies or subject matter experts. For example, at IBM, we actually have medical oncologists and surgical oncologists and oncology nurses on staff, as an example. They are the users, or were the users, and some of them are actually still practicing. But you know what? They work for IBM, so they may not be the average ordinary user. The point is, make sure that the people you engage with are really representative of your target users. So as an example, if we're developing a solution for oncologists, a treatment advisor solution that's supposed to support oncologists globally, well, it's great that we work with thought leaders at some of the greatest institutions of the world, medical institutions, Mayo and Memorial Sloan Kettering and MD Anderson and so on. That's great. However, we can't simply talk to them. If we're making this, we have to engage with physicians and people with cancer in Thailand, in India, in China, in Europe, and the community oncologists. The community oncologists that work in the New York City Hospital Corporation, who have twice as many patients as the oncologists in the academic medical centers. So make sure you talk with representative people. How do we do it? I'm going to try to give you a few key points about how. It's really important to go in context. So people have heard the term ethnography, acting like an anthropologist. It's important to engage with people where they live, work, and play. If you're really going to learn about their experience, if you only talk to people on the phone, bring them in for focus groups, bring them into your office, you have to go where they are, where they live, where they make decisions, where they are. That's a no-brainer. That's the gold standard. In practicality, if you're going to do what I said before, which is you're going to engage with several people a week all the time, that's hard to do. I don't have 800 designers or researchers or people that we can suddenly deploy all around the world. So what we do is we complement in-context research with remote engagements, using web conferences, using video, old-fashioned telephone calls, et cetera. So we combine the two because that remote engagement enables us to extend our reach. And there are other ways that we do that. The other thing I want to talk about, part of the reason why in-context observation is so critical is how many people here know how to ride a bicycle? Okay, yeah. How many people, if I gave you a day, how many people think, keep your hands up for a second. Let's get that physiological arousal. How many people think that if I gave you a day and I said, write down all the rules that you use when you keep your balance on a bicycle, how many people think that you could do that? Okay, lots of hands goes down. Keep your hands up. If you think you could write down all those rules, how many of you think that if you gave those rules to somebody who had never ridden a bicycle before, that they could then, with your rules, balance themselves on a bicycle? Thank you very much. You've just illustrated one of the most important concepts that I'll convey today, which is the fact that we know more than we can tell. This is the concept of tacit knowledge. The vast majority of everything we do as human beings is tacit. Doesn't mean unconscious in a Freudian sense. It means we can't put it into words. You can understand the words I'm speaking, but you don't know all the rules you're applying. You can recognize the human face, but you don't know why. An expert radiologist can see things on an image, but can't articulate how he or she actually does that fully. It takes experience, and the only way you learn about what's tacit from another human being is you certainly want to talk to people, but you have to observe people and you have to observe them in action because they can't tell you. So I'm not saying don't talk to people, but I'm saying don't overly rely on talking. Have them engage by observing and observe them in action. Let's see. The other thing in terms of, we don't have time to go into, and it's not really that useful to go into specific methods, but the essential principle is when you engage with people, I think there are a couple of attitudes to keep in mind. One is remember that most of what's going to be important is tacit, so how are you going to figure out that tacit dimension? The next thing is what kind of relationship do you establish? And really, we have a concept at IBM that we refer to as sponsor users. Now, sponsor users is a way of identifying a small number of people that really we are partnering with. They are the target users, the people that we're trying to serve, and we invite them in, and we want them to partner with us to help solve the problem. So we observe them and we learn from them, but we invite them into what we call our playbacks when we're doing our group reflection. We invite them into sessions where we're trying to generate ideas, so they become partners with us. Small handful, but that's what we do. But we engage with other people just by visiting them to learn more about it, about their experience. One-offs, maybe a couple of times. But no matter whether or not they're sponsor users or they're people we engage with once, we always look at them as partners. Okay? The other thing I would say, the other attitude that's really important is, I'm a clinical psychologist and I worked for 15 years doing therapy and research and teaching. And when I worked as a therapist, people would often ask me for advice. And I would say to them, I might have some opinions, but I'll be with you a couple times and you'll talk to me, but you'll always know a lot more about your experience than I ever will. And that's the attitude I think you have to take when you engage with people, is no matter how smart you are, they are the experts on their experience. So observe, keep in mind the tacit dimension, and approach it as if they are the experts on their experience. And by the way, because you're ultimately ignorant about their experience, use your ignorance. That's a lot of how we uncover things that are important. Okay, so let me close with the so what. The so what. And so we talked about why we do it, when we do it all the time, who we do it with, small samples, but small samples add up. I want to talk about the so what. The so what is this is a process that we're running all the time, and we are taking action all the time. And we take action in a couple of different ways. One way is, as we're engaging with people, we are trying to, on the fly, almost in real time, pull out the golden nuggets. What did we observe? What did we learn? We create learning summaries very quickly, very lean, not 80-page PowerPoints, but simple ways to capture what we're learning so we can communicate it to people who are not directly involved. We try to synthesize those in terms of models. So Bruce referred to personas. We're always trying to model the experience and understand what the underlying principles are that we can use as a lens to guide our actions and what we see. And we're doing that in real time. So if we're observing people on Wednesday and Thursday and engaging with people, Wednesday and Thursday, we're having these debrief sessions where we're actually trying to capture what we learn. The designers and the design teams are also taking action by making new things. So the next step immediately is, what did we learn? What do we need to learn next? What should we make next? And the next cycle begins. It's a very, once you get the engine running, it's amazing how teams can get in the groove. And that's sort of my final point, is that part of the reason why this is so important, I think, saying that engaging with people is important to human-centered design is just, that's just like kissing baby. It's ridiculous. But the important point I want to make is that, to me, this is the most transformative thing, is that engaging with people in that loop continuously transforms squads and organizations from top to bottom. Because what it does, there comes a point, I almost know the tipping point, I can feel the tipping point, and it's visceral. It actually is about that physiological arousal, perhaps. But it's when the engine is running and people do not want to move without engaging with people, where the developers are saying, has anybody seen this? What feedback did we get from the users? Where the stakeholders, who are sometimes a little bit removed from the day-to-day sausage making, are saying, what did you guys learn? What did you guys learn? Because we're communicating to them. Let me see the latest. And that's really where we want to get to, is where you go past that critical tipping point where engagement, you would never move forward, you would never move an inch without engaging with people very quickly, because it just speeds learning and it speeds innovation. Thank you very much.